Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Governor's Master Plan for Aging Equity Work Group meeting. Today, of course, we're meeting via webinar and telephone. If you'd like to join by audio at any time during this meeting, there is that option. I know a lot of people's internet has been unstable lately. And we do have live captioning available this morning. You can hit the CC button at the bottom of the bar. It may take a couple minutes for that to activate. Go ahead and next slide. This is a public meeting, and so of course we welcome your public comment. And so we will, as on the agenda, take public comment later on. We will share these instructions later. You can dial in, you can use your phone or your Zoom app to make that public comment. But later in the meeting, I'll go ahead and have these instructions reshared. And I am going to go ahead and hand the meeting over to California Department of Aging Director Kim McCoy-Wade for welcome.
Good morning, and thanks all. I am so pleased to be here, and also so pleased that due to the great work of this group, my role is quite small, is really in the space for this conversation to listen and learn. So much work has happened since I'm amazed that this is the third meeting. When I think about all that's been accomplished, both in work and also impact. And I'm so glad for your time this morning. Hope everybody is staying safe in every sense, from the heat, from the smoke, from the ongoing pandemic and pressures we're all living in. So with that, I'm really delighted that Rigo Saborio from St. Barnabas Senior Services and Carmelita Terci from AARP National Office are going to be really leading us through the work today. Let's look at the agenda for a second. As I said, here to do the intro and welcome, I will do very brief updates, as will Rigo and Carmelita. And then we'll get to the heart of the conversation about equity work group recommendations to the master plan. Another conversation, a proposal from Cheryl Brown, Commission on Aging member and former Assembly member Cheryl Brown on the equity glossary. And always public comment and closing. Before we get too far though, Amanda Lawrence, our project director, could you do roll call for the equity work group members who are here?
Yes, and I think we have a couple people on the phone. So if I call your name and you're not on via your Zoom app, please hit *9 to raise your hand and we'll move you over to speaking privileges.
And actually, excuse me, Amanda, before I do that, can we check on the caption service? Has it been able to begin, or what's our status?
We have captioning.
Yes, captioning is here.
Wonderful, thank you. Continue with the roll call.
Okay, Marcy Edelman.
Here.
Sylvia Osterlich. Donna Benton.
Here.
Catherine Blakemore will be joining us in about a half hour. Cheryl Brown.
Here.
Betsy Butler. Clark Harvey.
Here.
Marielle Creasel. Derek Lamb. I know Derek's here. Karen Lincoln.
Here.
Marty Lynch. Corey Novak. Bernice Nunez-Constant.
Here.
Kevin Prindeville is unable to make it today. Jeffrey Reynoso. Rigo Saborio.
Here.
Rita Sines. Kiera Harris.
Here.
Carmelita Terci.
Here.
Linda Tenerowitz. Valentine M. Villa. And Edie Yao.
Here.
Hi, Edie. All right, that concludes.
Hey, Amanda, this is Derek Lamb. I missed the roll call. My connection is very unstable.
Okay, gotcha, Derek. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes roll call.
Also,
Thank
Rita
you.
signs.
Rita, you're here? Okay, great.
Rigo or Carmelita, would you like to make any opening remarks before we proceed into updates?
No, I think we're good, Kim.
Okay. And I'm sorry, were there additional roll call outs?
It's Betsy Butler. I just wanted to make sure you heard me.
We hear you now.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you.
This is Marielle Creasel. I just want to make sure that I was also heard.
Hi, Marielle.
Terrific. Great. Thanks for the great turnout. So good to see so many folks virtually. I really do am so grateful to be connected now more than ever. So I have two brief updates. One, I'd like to always ground us in our timeline. We continue to work even though COVID response is all of our, of course, first priority professionally and personally. The plan continues. We are really at a very important final stage of stakeholder input. Many of you were part of the August 11th meeting, our first really full day substantive meeting since the pause for the pandemic. And amazingly enough, we heard reports from all 7 of the subcommittees and work groups about the status of the current stakeholder work. And the equity work group did present both the equity tool and some initial thoughts about recommendations that I know are the focus of today's meeting. So that was a very important meeting. This now is the last formal meeting of the equity work group for the planning process, heading into the final stakeholder meeting September 15th. That's when the stakeholder advisory group will be making its final recommendations on all topics to the administration. So there are some deadlines that we can go over or can be reviewed about written reports, your written recommendations by the end of this month, so that they can be shared by SAC members for consideration and integrated into a big picture view. And then some final cleanup after the last 15th meeting, if stakeholders need that to do some final feedback. But I think it'll be really important that the equity group be around and be available in case there is additional work needed to get this right and take advantage of all the opportunity and miss the pitfalls that can often hamper this work. So a really important time. I do just want to remind people, while the stakeholder planning work will be finishing in, gosh, about a month, the next piece is the administration, which is already underway with the cabinet to receive all the recommendations and to respond and head towards our final administration master plan in December. And then of course, the third phase that we need to begin planning with you all is implementation. Once the plan is out, then the work begins. So what are the right structures and systems and to keep this work alive and to really move it into action? Although, as many of you know, COVID has done that to a certain extent, that we are planning and doing as much as possible. So that's where we are at the highest level. The next few weeks will be really important to stay in close touch. Let me just pause there and see if either Amanda, you want to add anything, or Rigo or Carmelita to the timeline kind of level set.
I think it's good. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The next update I wanted to provide, and I'm so glad that we have a member of the SAC, Andy Imperato, to join us from Disability Rights California to talk about disability in the Master Plan for Aging. This has been a topic of discussion from the very beginning. In June, when the Master Plan Executive Order came out as Master Plan for Aging, is what is the connection between aging and disability? And at the very beginning, there was a clear commitment in the values that there would be a lot of emphasis on aging and disability, anti-ageism, anti-ableism, inclusion, access and functional needs, really working as much as possible in an intersectional, cross-sectional way. As we have come to this corner, however, we are realizing, in partnership with Andy and Christina Mills from Independent Living Center, that we need to do some more work to put that vision into action. And two things in particular have been surfaced. Some clarity around scope. Sometimes you hear it said, is this a master plan for disability? Or sometimes you hear it asked in specific questions like, oh, is the regional center system part of this plan? So there's some very specific scope questions that I think would be helpful to clarify. And then there are some very good process questions around, I think this group will appreciate this term, the disability lens. The equity work group has been really focused on race and ethnicity, as well as gender, and certainly includes disability focus, but hasn't primarily focused on that. And so Andy and Christina have been brainstorming a way that we can provide that kind of, stakeholders from the community can provide that kind of lens in an effective way. And so we are hoping that we can pull together, a short version is a group of all of the disability community reps from the various committees and work groups. So including Marielle Creasel from this group. Marielle, you and I are talking later today, I know, as well as representatives on LTSS and research and other folks that may be identified to help make sure that we, again, haven't missed opportunities for a core connection between people and programs and bias, discrimination, and inclusion, but also that we haven't set back all the work that's been done to bring aging and disability closer together in communities, in the advocacy community at the federal level. So this is an ongoing conversation. I invited Andy here to see if he could please add his perspective and again, open up for a few minutes for equity work group comments or concerns, but no, we need to create some more space and time for this conversation since time is so short here today. Andy.
Thank you, Kim. Can you hear me okay? So first, Kim, I just want to be clear. I'm kind of, this is like a relay race where I got the baton from Catherine Blakemore, so I'm kind of coming into this late as the new executive director at Disability Rights California. I've actually been incredibly impressed with the effort that is being made to include disability wherever it's appropriate and it fits in the work of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So I want to be clear that I think there's a lot of positive effort happening and there's a lot of good inclusion of disability issues in recommendations and kind of covering the waterfront of issues that we're covering in this master plan. I also, Kim, have just been very appreciative of your willingness to spend time kind of getting under the hood with the disability community and really helping us think about where does it fit naturally to integrate disability issues. And I think you have a good instinct for that. You mentioned the regional centers. Another question is, are we getting into issues for kids with disabilities in the context of the master plan for aging? And I think the answer to that is probably generally going to be no. But I do think it helps to just have clarity so that Christina and I and other stakeholders can kind of give input on the things where everybody agrees this is part of the scope of this report. And as Christina and I discussed with you, Kim, we're also kind of excited when we get to the implementation stage to think about, can we build on the collaboration that happened around creating these recommendations as we work to implement them? And could we pull together a similar stakeholder group that would have the expertise to do a broader master plan for disability for the state of California that is in sync with this master plan for aging, but also adds other areas that we've all agreed would be beyond the scope of this plan. So I'm excited. I appreciate everybody's desire to include disability wherever it fits and wherever it's appropriate. And I'm looking forward to the next steps in the process.
Great.
I want to thank Andy. He is very kind in saying he kind of came on he joined the stakeholder process, the moving train right in the middle, and has without a lot of onboarding has jumped right on. So I am grateful for the partnership, even through all the changes and challenges. I did want to create some space for Marielle. Again, scheduling on my part has been challenging, so we're not having a chance to talk till later this afternoon, but just to give you a chance, or if there are other members on the equity work group who want to reply or offer any comment on what Andy and I just shared.
This is Rita.
Thank you so much. I agree with Andy and everything that he said. I think that there are some issues here of scope and clarity that need to be talked about at greater length to connect the dots all appropriately between disability and aging, and I appreciate your input, Andy. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Was that Rita raising her?
Yeah. I think that was so well said. And I think everyone appreciates the acknowledgement of the attempts to ensure that disabilities and that people who are in this community are included in what we've been doing. I think there's been a real attention to that.
Okay, well, thank you. More to come on that front. We will do our very best to keep the communication transparent and clear as we have these various conversations and pull together these key leaders for these conversations. But thank you so much. Wanted to at least provide that update here to the group. And again, feel free to send feedback offline as well.
Kim, this is Andy. Can I just make one other quick point? As we're looking at this picture of this family in the context of the equity conversation, I encourage us to think about the visuals connected with the final report and really making the effort to reflect the diversity of California and the populations that are affected by the report, including, you know, people with Down syndrome as they age, people with a wide range of disabilities. Because the visuals also tell the story. So I just wanted, I love this photograph, and I just wanted to give that shout out that the visuals matter too.
Thank you. We actually would love to consult with folks on images as well as words, and did invest in a broader set of pictures for CDA. The standing kind of stock photos, as many of you may know, leave a lot to be desired on aging and disability and race and family structure. So we have done our best to diversify and are getting used to using them, but we could use more input and advice. I couldn't agree more. Pictures sometimes speak louder than words. With that, I want to hand the mic back to Rigo and Carmelita. Okay, thanks. Rigo.
I think I'm next with the equity tool.
Oh, I apologize. I thought there was a
That's
little
right. Oh, sorry.
on-ramp.
Rigo?
Or I can do it.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We're a team. Well, we wanted to just situate people before handing the baton to Carmelita, just to remind you where you've been and where we've come. I sometimes forget what day of the week it is, and I just think it's important that we ground ourselves in all the work that you all have done. To even go back further, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee in December raised the issue of we needed an equity work group. And in January it was formed, and in February met and did begin the work on purpose and scope. Really foundational for aging to have an equity work group table set in the aging space. So just the presence was a strong step. Then these questions developed, the equity tool, we've been calling it for shorthand, that have been refined and developed and then road tested. They are now have been deployed, if you will, to all of the 7, well, you're one of them, the other 6 work groups and committees to utilize in informing their work. And so whether it's, and it's been, I don't want to speak for Susan Damaris, but it was also shared with the Governor's Alzheimer's Task Force as well as they worked on their recommendations. Susan, of course, is our joint member between the two, but the research subcommittee, LTSS, and the work groups of SAC members meeting on the all the goals, 2, 3, and 4, livable communities, purpose, health and well-being, economic security, and safety. A very important deployment, of course, was the very first one right before the pandemic pause to the Long-Term Services and Support Subcommittee. They brought the draft report to the committee at our 2nd meeting in March. You all had much feedback for them. It was incorporated, further discussion in SAC, more was incorporated. So again, the committee and the tool in action. There's ongoing COVID response you've provided through ad hoc meetings and calls with us, and we're grateful for that in terms of making sure that our materials are reaching the communities that we know need them the most. Our funds, our CARES funds at CDA, we have taken steps based on your input to do different targeting and prioritization based on data-driven and community input on the needs. And here you are in August, draft recommendations were presented to the full SAC. So that is an incredible body of work, both again in the amount of it, but also the process of consultation and the input and the impact in informing the whole process and informing our department and our agency. And so we are setting and really breaking new ground as well. And I, of course, amidst the incredible national challenges and opportunities around racial injustice and protests for racial justice in particular. Next slide, unless Rigo, you want to take the mic back, because here's the homework left.
Gosh, well, I am so sorry. I have such an unstable internet connection right now. So thank you for stepping in there.
Sure, that was me last week, so I'm happy to do it. Do you want to do this one?
Sure. Well, I think there's a few things that that are remaining to be accomplished. There's a great deal that has been done so far, as Kim noted. And so between now and August 31st, we're going to be finalizing the equity recommendations that the group has been working on. These recommendations will be.
Well, that's not working, is it?
Yeah, Rigo, you might want to try audio and not video. But
You're breaking up.
so you can see on the slide the two more products that the committee.
Rigo, you sound like you're humming. So.
Oh, we all try.
Yeah, that didn't work.
Oh,
Yeah, we'll keep working with Rigo. Fortunately, as Carmelita says, he's the second substantive item, so we can get him back for the second half on a different connection. But I think people can see the bullets, and just to make sure everyone's tracking, the final equity recommendations and the glossary are the two work products. Drafts by the end of the month, present at the SAC meeting on the 15th. And then as I said, we anticipate there'll be some follow-up from that meeting, as there was when the LTSS report was presented. And then we'd like to leave this last bullet that as you know, we've launched the California for All Ages campaign, working on anti-ageism. We are launching our equity webinars with providers, and we are launching our state employee staff are going through a Government Alliance for Racial Racial Equity and Advancement. So we have a lot in play, and we would like to continue to find new ways as master plan planning comes to an end, to continue to engage in a formal way and an ongoing way, an outcome-driven way on equity activities around aging. So we have a placeholder bullet here, more to come, and welcome your thoughts on that, but just want to name how valuable that is. Okay, now Carmelita, I think we have.
Sorry about that, Kim. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all for all the tireless work that you've put into bringing the equity tool to its current iteration and to ensuring that equity is the cornerstone of the MPA. As I've heard Cheryl Brown say many, many times, equity has to be baked in, not sprinkled on. And we've said from the beginning that the equity tool is a work in progress. It's a living document. And as Kim has mentioned, the last meeting, several recommendations were made to enhance the tool, and these suggestions were incorporated, and that version was sent to the equity work group. I've got too many meetings in my head. So since the June meeting, one of the members of the stakeholders committee reached out to us to say that question number 2 could be strengthened so that it explicitly states that input from community stakeholders, from those folks who are directly impacted by the MPA, need to be included in the recommendations. While we felt that input from the community members was implied in question number 2, she felt that it needed to be stated directly. So on the slide is the current revision of the question number 2, which reads, how are the basic needs gaps, or I can't see the rest of it, Ms. Mars. Oh, is it? How are the basic needs gaps in organizations equity determined when designing the recommendations? Primary research, secondary research, etc. Who was involved in determining the recommendations? Were stakeholder groups with memberships directly impacted by the MPA included? If so, which ones engaged and how? Did you ensure that their recommendations and considerations were included in your recommendations? So we ran this by the SAC member, and she liked it and agreed with it. So any questions or comments about that? The entire tool is listed on the website for the CDA. And so we encourage you to look at it and to and welcome your feedback as usual. Okay. And I think lastly, I'd like to say that I want to borrow a quote and a saying that I know the program subcommittee has used, which is nothing about us without us. And I think this is a saying that sums up our equity work. And I think it has been included in the process for the MPA from the beginning, from the creation of the equity work group to the open meetings and to the invitation for public comment. So thank you, Kim, and the rest of the CDA staff for that.
All right. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh boy. All right. Well, glad to hear that you could hear me, and thank you for stepping in for me, Kim. Anyway, next is we're going to be talking about the work that the number of the folks on the equity work group have been working on, which is the equity recommendations that essentially were divided into 3 areas. And so the first was, obviously looking at structural and systemic issues within equity, and then also looking at programs, and finally evaluation and assessments. And I'm going to, go over the recommendations that speak to structures and systems. So I'm stepping in today for Kevin, who's been leading some of this work with some of our colleagues, and so happy to share. So the first one obviously speaks to, when we think about equity, it's obviously our work has been primarily thinking it through the lens of aging, equity within aging for the master plan for aging. But reality is that equity touches all corners and it's cross-cutting. So that being said, we feel that at the very top, from the very top, the administration should commit to developing a master plan for equity across state government for all Californians. That's building off the work that we've done here for the master plan for aging. As we know, aging also touches on so many through different departments and areas. So it's only going to be as strong as it's able to speak to through an equity lens to all departments within the administration. The next recommendation is for the master plan for aging, that it must adopt as a primary goal addressing systemic inequities and how we age that result from systemic racism and other forms of discrimination and bias. The next is the master plan for aging implementation plan should include a permanent equity advisory committee comprised of stakeholders to advise and monitor implementation. So definitely the work should continue, and should continue through this a formal group that comes together, and that also that we continue to use the equity tool to help to guide in terms of design and refining programs. Next slide. And we also believe that it needs to be represented within our systems and structures within the department. And as such, the recommendation is for the California Department of Aging should create a director of equity that's responsible for empowering and ensuring that CDA's programs are advancing equity and require diversity, equity, and inclusion training for all staff that's tied to specific outcome measures and data with clear intent about the purpose and goals of the training. And again, along the same lines of thinking, that it just should not be, confined to CDA, but it also, this should be true for other state agencies. They should be held accountable to do the same. Also aging and disability service providers, advocacy organizations, and foundations in California should develop their own diversity, equity, and inclusion plans. And that includes also assessing their own leadership structures, from boards to executive and leadership staff and direct, not just the direct staffing, but at all levels, and developing a plan based on those assessments that aligns and assures diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now I'm going to turn it over to Edie to speak about the programs.
Thank you, Rigo. Yeah, so we also wanted to include a piece about programs, given that, we realize that there are lots of programs out there already for the aging population, and yet there are programs that are needed to advance equity and to meet the needs of specific populations within the aging community, particularly those who face disparate outcomes, including Black, Indigenous, people of color, immigrants, people with limited English proficiency, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, and women. And so we really wanted to think about what's our best recommendation for the master plan for aging in this sense, knowing that there's a need for programs to address this gap. And so our first, I think our first recommendation is, while it may seem really simple, it's really knowing your audience. And there's a great tool called the Healthy Places Index that we believe would be a great starting tool that anyone can access. But oftentimes, I think our key message is being strategic and understanding the full scope of your audience, and not just going for the low-hanging fruit, if you will. It's also really critical to partner with the community. So thinking about, who are the key agencies, community leaders that ought to be included in this process from start to finish. Carmelita had referenced the phrase "nothing about us without us," and it's appropriate that we had Andy talk about disabilities early on, because this is a mantra that was used very much so in the disability movement, and it's the whole notion of people with disabilities know what they need. And likewise, any specific population that we know we need to address to advance equity, that they ought to have a seat at the table from the start, so from the planning process and throughout. And that's the other thing that we wanted to highlight, that it's not only just in the planning process, but even as we're developing the program and launching the program and doing outreach and reassessing, that the community has to be so involved. I hear so many times when agencies receive a grant and they seek out a particular community, we have money, we're going to fund this program, and they're, great partners, and then once that funding dries up, they disappear. And this has caused strife in so many communities where they recognize, we're not true partners. And that's the area that we really want to highlight. So advancing equity through planning, delivery, and outreach. And to highlight some of the other nuances when programs are being developed. So taking into account linguistic and cultural nuances, And I do want to highlight this specific area because we've had a lot of conversations about it's not just about language, for example, Spanish or Chinese, but also taking into account health literacy and language that the everyday person would understand, that's very important. And then also, as I mentioned, some of the other populations' needs. The other one I want to highlight is that we've discussed a lot about the digital divide, and something that we see playing out every day since the pandemic in California. And it's something, you know, to really think about as we're developing programs throughout and planning that piece. So that I think that sums up programs, Rico.
Great, thank you, Edie. And now to speak to the evaluation and assessment, Karen.
Sure, good morning, everyone. So we believe that measurement is an important but fairly underutilized tool for reducing disparities in aging and disability services. So we also believe that measurement will be very useful for policymakers, providers, consumers, and other stakeholders to, one, identify disparities in their communities and to target resources and interventions to reduce disparities, and then also to monitor the impact of these interventions and practices and policies to determine whether they're actually reducing disparities or increasing disparities. So in order for to have an effective tool for advancing equity, we have several recommendations. The first is to develop an inclusive assessment and evaluation plan to identify gaps in data, priority problems, select appropriate outcome indicators, set targets, and measure results. And so one of the things that we've done is provide examples of reports that can provide guidance. And that's the overall theme for this particular set of recommendations, is to not list specific indicators, but to provide guidance in terms of how to identify the appropriate measures for determining equity. So one of the reports that's suggested under this recommendation is by the Health Equity Task Force, and it outlines a framework for advancing equity and value. The second recommendation is we recognize that there's a lack of data on the experience of diverse older adults and their families. So we recommend that that available tools and frameworks be identified that target local factors that determine inequity in community conditions. So Edie mentioned the Healthy Places Index, which we think will be very important for identifying highly vulnerable populations and targets for intervention. We've also recommended the International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health, because we believe that that report will help organize and document functioning and disability as a function of individual health, environmental factors, and personal factors. We recommended the CHIS, the California Health Interview Survey. We think it's very helpful for utilizing the nation's largest state health survey to better obtain health data about the state's various disparity populations, and also the Elder Economic Security Standard Index, the ELDER Index. We think it will provide an evidence-based indicator of the actual basic costs faced by older adults. Next slide. So in terms of the next recommendation, we realize the importance of directly measuring inequities and the progress toward achieving that. And so we're recommending that disparities sensitive or equity sensitive measures be used to monitor the implementation of the Master Plan on Aging. And what that means in terms of these disparity sensitive or equity sensitive measures is that they be based on the following criteria. One, that a condition's prevalence among populations with social factors be determined. Also, the size of the disparity, the strength of the evidence linking improvement on the measure to improvement in target outcomes for populations with social risk factors, and the actionability of the measure. And so one of the reports that we recommended to provide guidance on identifying disparity-sensitive measures is written by we want qualitative and quantitative measures, by the way, and it's written by the Urban Institute. They have a white paper, and it's titled The State of Equity Measurement. It lists a framework for identifying measures and also examples of measures that have been used by other organizations across the country. It's a very important report. So for those who are interested in designing and utilizing measures that can be standardized across programs, across counties, across cities, etc., this is an important report for providing that guidance. And then finally, we recommend that performance data be reported so that we can actually see the different subpopulations within disparity populations that are being impacted by the plan, both the improvements as well as things that might be widening disparities. And so we want data that are stratified by race, ethnicity, language, socioeconomic status, age, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status, and other demographic factors to help us better understand the intersectionality of populations and how they're being impacted by the plan, as well as if in fact the plan is reducing disparities or widening disparities.
Oh, that's great.
Great. So we could either stop here and maybe take some comments and some questions around the recommendations, or we can keep going in terms of the shared language. But it seems like we've covered quite a bit of ground over the 3 areas of the recommendation. So perhaps we can just take a moment and see if anyone has any thoughts, reflections to what you just heard. Anything that you think we've missed, or just any clarifying questions, feel free.
Well, this is Rita. I think this is fabulous. Very well done. You can really tell the thought that was put into this, and it seems really to cover the wide range of what should be required.
Thank you, Rita.
Hi, this is Marcy Edelman, and so much work is in here. It really is inspiring, and inspiring in how comprehensive it is and thoughtful. So just thanks to everybody.
Thank you. Anyone else?
This is Marielle Creasel. I have a question. The equity decision, the OMSED decision was included in the equity tool in previous drafts. It seems to be missing at this point. Karen, can you explain why that is?
Yes, it's Carmelita. The equity tool in its entirety with the longer introduction is on the website. So for this particular meeting, we just took the question number 2, which we were discussing. So, but you can see the whole equity tool in its entirety on the website, and it does include the statement about the Olmstead Act.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, thoughts?
This is Andy. I recognize this is kind of a high-level summary, but I'm wondering if there might be some places where we could call out more related to within group differences. Like in the disability space, there's a tendency when they look to include a disability perspective, they don't always think about diversity within the disability community. And so just something about, especially in that area where we're talking about nothing about us without us, and putting together inclusive groups to guide research and policy, just paying attention to within group differences as part of that, I think could be helpful. And a related issue is sometimes the people who can afford to participate are people that have full-time jobs, but they're not always as close to the problem as people that can't participate as part of their job. So, you know, having some funding to pay people for their expertise could result in more diverse folks being involved in research and policy making. So it might be worth having a shout out to that. And I realize everything I just said might be in the longer report, but I just wanted to flag it.
No, those are excellent points, Andy. In fact, I'll just say this, as Carmelita mentioned in the equity tool, there's sort of this longer version that includes values and principle statements. And so within that, it does have a particular bullet that speaks to, you know, sort of segments within particular groups and calling them out and being very intentional and explicit about that. So that's an excellent point. And also I think, and Kim, please correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously there's still time between now and the 31st in particular for this group to provide, you know, specific details beyond this conversation as well. So, I mean, so clearly, I think any input is important, and don't hesitate to send that to us. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, then I'm going to ask Cheryl then to step in and talk about the shared language glossary of terms.
Thank you, Rigo. You know, our work came out of our meetings and the discussions on the meanings of words. It's really interesting because we were looking at the words, and when I would say something, it didn't mean the same thing to me as it did someone else. It was really an interesting dichotomy that we did. So the equity work group created this glossary of terms, and it will be used to create and enhance literacy and transparency as we seek to address equity through the master plan for aging. You can see the words that are included. And as I heard Andy speaking a minute ago, I had to make a note because when I looked at disability, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in defining what disability is. So Andy, I hope you'll look at it and give us a more, give us a better definition. And any of these things can be changed, can be edited, I guess you could say. With this interest that came about, I think her name, Jennifer, was the one that made the form so that we could collect the terms, and I want to thank her for that. But one of the terms, cultural competence, came about, and several of our members preferred using the term cultural responsiveness or appropriateness or humility. So we just put in there the meaning that's there, and anyone that wants to view it can look at the larger and the longer definitions. The other thing is, I thought it was pretty good that we looked at inclusion. And one of the things that stood out to me was the person who put it in said, diversity is being asked to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Thought it was excellent. Then Karen Lincoln, when I came up with a graphic I thought was great, Karen comes back and says, I don't like that graphic. So she gave us a different graphic that many people are now using, and it is excellent. And it's, everyone can have a bicycle, but the bicycle needs to fit the person instead of just having a bicycle, which is equality. So the term baked in instead of sprinkled on came from a professor over at USC, Manuel Pasteur, And so I don't want to take credit for his work, but I lifted it, and it seems that it's sticking with our group. Now, we have several words, and I didn't know if we needed to go over any of them or not. But there is a person that's been working with me who is interested in having a word because she wanted to add something to this presentation. Kiera Harris.
Kiera?
Kiera?
Is she on?
I've been talking and I've been muted the entire time. So yeah, I just wanted to second Cheryl's idea for doing this glossary, because when we have so many terms in a large document, it's important that we have a shared definition of what these terms mean, because we could be having completely different interpretations. And so much of, you can't really have conversation about equity work unless you are also understanding that we're talking about racism. Racism today, racism in the past, and other issues of discrimination and bias. And so I thought having definitions for those words would be important for the reader and for ourselves and for understanding the issues. So
great.
Hopefully everyone can review and add comments before we have to have a final presentation at the end of the month.
And it's just been a lot of work to do this, but it's been great. Rigo, you and Kevin have just been great leaders. And I thank you so much for listening to me when I said, you know, we need to have a glossary. And then you put me in charge. I didn't mean for that to happen, but I'm glad you did.
Well, when Cheryl speaks, people listen. So we absolutely do. No doubt about it.
Well, thank you, Rigo.
It's been a team effort.
This is Rita. I'd like to talk a little bit about the examples that were given, which I thought were excellent. And I wanted to know if other examples, going back to Kiara's point about racism, other examples were considered, like the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was not repealed until 1943, and the Mexican Repatriation Act, in which 400,000 to 2 million Mexicans, and 6% of them were Mexican Americans, were returned to Mexico, or the Japanese internment.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Rita?
Yeah.
That did not come up, but we can certainly, that didn't come up, but that can be added with no problem.
Okay. Because, you know, you could look at it as an immigration issue, but I think back to Kiara's point, it all comes down to racism. And even the internment of the Japanese Americans, because Italians and Germans were not interned at such a great extent.
Well, one of the things that we did was to put the word out to everyone that we were putting this together and we asked for their information. The other thing is, when I started this, I said it would be words that were germane to the document itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we came up with ableism and ageism and bias.
I think the definitions are fabulous. And I agree with Kara. You know, you could, this happened to us when we were doing the redesign of the child welfare system years ago. The issue that everybody thought that they were saying the same thing, but they weren't. Right. And so I think this is really critical. And well, it's fabulous. It's a fabulous product.
Well, thank you. If you think that we should have a space for those things, please, could you send it to an email and send it to me, or send it to me.
Yeah, and I realize that, you know, you want an economy of space too. So I'll send you the information and you can consider it. And if it doesn't get in, I get it. But I just wanted to make sure that they were considered.
No, I think that's very important. I really believe everyone should be included. You should be able to look at the master plan and see yourself in it.
This is
Hey,
Carmelita. I also think that there's a way that this glossary is a living document like the equity tool, so that we need to keep adding to it and making sure that that it's a work in progress. Because I don't think we even talked about, Cheryl, socioeconomic status, which I think is in one of the recommendations, and that seems to be a word that needs to be in there as well.
This is, I just want to mention that I appreciate talk about the historical perspective.
We have an echo there, Dirk.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to thank Rita for bringing up the history, because that's really important for us to note as they create, the perspective of how other groups are being discriminated against American history. So thank you.
This is Leandra. I just wanted to mention that I've been working on an equity tool for my association, so I'm happy to share that. And what I've found is there are a couple tools that are already created that are pretty good quality. So I think if you'd like, Cheryl, I can send that to you so you can pull from it maybe what we might want to add to ours, just so you don't have to spend so much time recreating the will.
That's great. Thank you. You're on the committee. You're supposed to be doing that.
I know. I actually just finished this work, so just wanted you to know.
Okay, and I know you've been busy. Everyone in this group has been busy on every other area of this master plan. So that's it for us, Rigo, unless someone else has something to add.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. I think you said something very succinctly, and I think it's very true. I think our work collectively really has led to your point about the MPA needing to be reflective of all Californians, right? Yes. And I think the work that was shared earlier in terms of our accomplishments, us coming together, certainly through the support of Kim and the team at CDA, and allowing us to really make sure that we embed equity throughout the MPA and to develop tools that help us to assure this. But these are sort of living tools, if you will. They can be revised, and your input is critical. So certainly, I think it doesn't stop here. I think we have time, as Cheryl pointed out. If you've got other thoughts and ideas to share with regards to the glossary, please do so, ideally before the 31st, but then there's still even more time after that. And that's true also for the equity tool and its values and principles. And you definitely should take time to look at that on the webpage. And then also we welcome any additional thoughts and recommendations with regards to the 3 areas within the recommendations that have been developed. With that, unless there's any other comments or questions, I'm going to turn it back to Kim so that we can move forward.
Thank you. I believe we are going to move next to the public comment. Before we do, let's see, how are we doing on time? Great, we're doing great. I'm just so struck by the comments just now about the history that older Californians have experienced. Harvey Milk would be 90. What people have seen, our elders have seen in the struggle for equity and the discrimination and exclusion that they have experienced personally. Both what that means for the trauma that has been experienced, but also what it means for the resilience and the survival and the thriving that the younger generations can learn from at these tough times. So history is heavy on our minds and hearts right now. We're reaching out to kind of get a master plan for aging historian to do some history of aging policy in California, so we know where we came from on this journey. But I don't have a recommendation or a request, but just want to hold that space for what was just voiced about the incredible living history of the struggle for equity that our elders have, and how we learn from that and lift that up is on my mind.
Well, Kim, maybe we could have a paragraph, or we could have a page, whatever we could have in the document itself that explains that historic discrimination, because it is deep, and many people would not understand it. And I know that I understood it before, but after I read The Color of Law, then I really understood it. So I think that maybe that's another thing we should do, is look at that and have someone write up. Unless Rita wants to write it up, and unless Rita wants to write
Good
up.
try, Cheryl. I will be glad to provide some of the information. And
Well,
you mentioned The Color of Law. Are some of these things mentioned in The Color of Law?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the history of discrimination, the law, the legal discrimination. I'm not talking about discrimination that we suffer all the time, but the legal discrimination that was part of what California's history is, that nobody ever thought that California would be that way.
And there's certainly disability components that, if you're doing an introduction, I think become very significant in terms of institutionalization, sterilization. The sterilization impacted people in Latinx communities in LA. There's a lot of work that's been done about that, among other places. So if there's sort of a context for that, I think it would be worthy of doing that intersection with disability, which impacts, of course, all people with disabilities and seniors with disabilities.
Do you have information that you can provide on?
I am sure that Andy and I can find you something.
And you can route that to me, and we are scoping a related project around oral history of elders in this space of living through the era of legal discrimination. Again, not to minimize in any way the continuing institutionalized discrimination that happens across so many economic and carceral and social structures, but the legal regime that was in, you have to be over 50 in many ways to have experienced that. And so I think there's an incredible knowledge and lived experience from that we want to figure out in the master plan and in CDA generally, and in this moment of struggle for liberation and survival of the pandemic, that we lift up. So we're working on that, but I think there's a clear intersect with the equity work group to kind of get that off the ground and make sure we bake that in, Dr. Pastor. Okay,
Cheryl. Hi, it's Marcy. Cheryl, go ahead, Marcy. I'm sorry. I just was going to say, Cheryl, I can send you the history of the law in California and LGBTQ rights.
Good. That would be great. And maybe we can find a place before Kim gets all of hers off the ground where we can just, put it in so that people will understand that this is not something we're making up. It's not something that we want. It's something we want to bind each other together with, that information.
Can I just add one comment? I'm not sure how we are on time. Are we okay on time, Kim?
I believe so. We want to have a robust public comment, but we're well ahead of schedule. So I think we should have some committee discussion.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to echo this conversation, and I've stated this in other meetings, particularly around policy. And oftentimes we sort of look at the condition of things and don't really understand how it came to be, and how many populations, many communities, many groups have been excluded from owning their own body, let alone owning land, or being able to vote, etc. And so I think what we see now in terms of inequity is rooted in exclusion. And I think it's really important for us to think about that, whether it's the Chinese Exclusion Act, whether it's Jim Crow and prior to Jim Crow, where what we're seeing now is very difficult for us to address if we don't understand how deeply rooted some of this inequality is. And it's also really important, with that in mind, that there is going to be, in order for us to have equity, we're talking about a fair distribution, and that it's sort of each according to their need. And how do we do that without certain groups feeling as if they're not getting as much attention, or certain groups feeling like, well, maybe some groups are getting more attention? But I think it's really fair for us to lay the sort of playing field and say that there has been, inequality and inequity is not equal. It's not a random factor that impacts people. It impacts people, and it's been institutionalized and has impacted people very differently historically. And so with that in mind, I think it's really important for us to think about, given this historical inequality, given this historical inequity that is based in actions, practices, beliefs, and laws, what do we prioritize? And so I just want to move boldly forward in terms of these recommendations with how do we prioritize, given limited resources, what our next steps are. And some of those decisions really do need to be based in some of these historical systems that have disproportionately impacted certain populations.
That's
Kim,
one.
I have a comment. May I make a comment?
Please.
So I very much appreciate this conversation around the history. And I also think that we're all living a very historical moment now, right? With the pandemic and the inequities that we have seen in particularly Black and Brown communities. And so I also think some sort of acknowledgement of what's happening now will be important, especially as we know that what's happening now and the deaths that we're seeing really in the inequality is going to be with us. The impact of that's going to be with us for many years to come, especially with the loss of life that our communities are experiencing. And so, though I absolutely agree, historical perspective is important, but not to forget what's happening now.
Yeah,
so I'm not sure how we would include that, but
I heard it as to be clear about where we are, you have to know where we were, how we got here.
Yes.
And then that is how you're going to get to where we need to be. So absolutely, it's not history. Well, I love history, but it's not history for an academic sense, but it is history for strategic, deeply and root cause analysis, so that we're clear about how we got here and how we get out, how we get forward.
Sure. This is Rita. I think that it's particularly important so that the victims don't be blamed for what is happening to them.
That's right.
That people understand, like, some of the examples given in the documents we received, redlining, during Japanese internment. I know in my area, a lot of people lost their livelihoods, their property, their farms. The Chinese Exclusion Act, actually the Page Act, preventing Chinese women from coming to the United States, was intended to ensure that the great number of Chinese workers who were working on the railroad did not have families. So, it's people are not sitting back letting things be done to them. They're being done to them aggressively. And that's why so many of our communities do not have the assets and the wherewithal you know, take care of themselves in the way we would like to see. So, you know, that was my point of bringing it up. How we got here and how our particularly Black and Hispanic communities are being impacted is a direct result of having been discriminated against all these years. So.
This is Leandra. I really think that considering this conversation that it makes sense. I think as Cheryl or someone recommended that we do have a cover page that acknowledges the historical context, which would highlight the need to understand these terms and use these terms and define these terms. I think that would be a good place to, you know, acknowledge all of this, talking about the historical perspective, but also talking about the fact that we're in a racial pandemic and kind of ending with that.
Mm.
This is Jeff. If I could just add one point around the terms, and I really appreciate the attention to including kind of the structural causes or the root causes of inequity. You know, terms like ableism, I think is getting at what is the, you know, the root cause of inequity when we think about systems and policies and practices. I'll also highlight, I saw LGBTQ as one of the terms. I think it would be helpful and useful to include homophobia, so the actual system that is causing those inequities. I'm really glad to see nativism. I think we could also include xenophobia there, so very related but different terms. So, you know, I think it's a great document. I think we should, as we think about the individual level characteristics of individuals and communities, it's helpful to kind of raise up and be very explicit about the actual systems that are causing disparities and inequities in all of, you know, these marginalized communities.
The reason that I did not include, well, xenophobia is on there. It was Dr. Figueroa sent it in, and he sent it in a little late, so it just, I don't think it made it. But what I was doing and what we were doing is trying to identify words that were actually in the document, in the master plan. And that way, it kind of identifies and explains what it is you're reading. The only reason, if in fact those other, if we can include them, but that was the purpose of the glossary, so that you could read it and we could all be on the same page. If you want to add the other, that's fine, because we're adding now, if it's okay with Kim, we're adding the history and the information that Rita mentioned and that others have mentioned on this call.
Other comments from the committee?
This is Marielle Creasel. I just want to add that I don't think it can be ignored that half of the deaths from the pandemic are people with disabilities, and there's a component of eugenics there, and that's part of our history, as well as how that might influence medical rationing and how that's part of the pandemic narrative as well. And so I'd like to contribute, continue doing more research and contribute that part of it about eugenics and how that role in our history.
That would be fine.
Thank you.
Kim, this is Andy. I wanted to go back to something that I think Karen Lincoln said. She referenced at the end of her remarks kind of scarce resources. And I guess I just want us to, and this is kind of bigger than the equity working group, but I just want us to think about, if we start the conversation about a 10-year master plan for aging, assuming that we're in a budget deficit and we've got scarce resources, it's harder to address long-term inequity. And I feel like somewhere in the document we should talk about the need to bring new resources to the table to address these long-standing inequities, and that the people who benefited from all of these laws are the ones that have more resources, and they need to be part of supporting addressing the inequities. So just something about that I think could be helpful. I realize that may sound political, but I'm worried that we're going to have all these great recommendations and then we're going to be told, sorry, we don't have any money.
Well, we did that with Proposition 63, and we taxed people that made over $1 million, 1%. So it's probably something that, and especially now that they've made so much more money in the pandemic than they did before, that might be something that can go forward.
And my last comment, this is Kiara, based upon what Marielle has said about eugenics, and then also what you're saying, Andy, about resources. The reason why we have to also address in this cover letter or this historical document, why these laws and why these disparities even existed. What was the rationale for that? And that is some ideas of race superiority, and how that has really been at the root of all of these issues in terms of laws of division and exclusion. So that'll be part of the cover letter as well, I think.
I have lots of notes. And so if anybody wants to meet with, write something up, put it together, and then let's have a Zoom meeting, and I will be more than happy to facilitate.
Thank you, and I do want to take advantage of the fact that we have so much time for public comment, and we do have about 40 people on the line. I also just want to note that we have much of our master plan team here as well, and that this type of analysis, our intention is to have it woven throughout the master plan. And what's coming to mind for me is Dr. Margot Kuchel's analysis of homelessness among African-American males in particular, and her tracing of that cohort's older African-American males, that cohort's lived experience through redlining, through recession, through mass incarceration, and how when you lay those decisions of policy against that demographic cohort, it's not at all surprising that that's where we are. And so understanding, I think we're looking to have that lens again, not just in the equity section sprinkled on, but where we have these deep inequities, whether it's the pandemic happening right now, homeless crisis, other areas, that we make those clear connections about how we got here, again, in the service of how we get forward. Carmelita, Rigo, any comments before we move to the public comment?
No, again, just in closing, I think it's been a very enriching, once again, conversation that certainly just when you think you've covered all your bases, clearly there's still much more that we need to consider and think about. And again, just as a great reminder why this group came together. So certainly I want to say thank you to everyone for making and taking the time to contribute this morning.
Carmelita? Okay, well, we'll come back again to a closer, but let's go. Maria, if you could help us with our cues in the public comment section, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Kim. Thank you. Nancy Volpert, we've unmuted your line. You can jump in.
Good morning. Nancy Volpert with Jewish Family Service of Los Angeles. First and foremost, thank you to all of you. This has been an incredible discussion, and the recommendations are tremendously helpful, both for us as a state, and I look forward to incorporating them. One question I'd like to suggest, raise, ask, is in the list on page 15 of considerations, and throughout, nowhere do you mention religion. And we know that, for example, right now, the Muslim community has been targeted again and again for discrimination and harassment. We know that Sikh men who are wearing their head coverings have been attacked, and we know that there are specific needs that go with some people's religious beliefs. In the Jewish community, many of our elders, particularly those who are Holocaust survivors, have particular needs or might need specific foods. Seventh-day Adventists similarly. And so I know you included cultural reference, but I wonder if there should be an explicit reference somehow to religious discrimination, which was when you talk about covenants and restrictions. I know that when my grandmother bought her first house, the document said they can't sell to Jews, which is illegal and therefore, doesn't apply, but that still exists in some of the legal documents in our history. And so I think when you talk about xenophobia, when you talk about these other issues, it would be terrific if we could consider adding that to the conversation as well, so that we can appropriately meet the needs of our elders with dignity and respect.
Thank you, Nancy. Our next comment is from Rosemarie Famani. Rosemarie, your line is open.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, I'm always thinking about where to find the money to do this so we can actually do this. And I'm wondering, and this may be a question for the CDA, I'm in San Diego and we are forever wondering what to do with the ADRC, which is a requirement in the Older Americans Act, which is Aging and Disability Resource, the Aging and Disability Resource Connection. It is sort of like a stepchild and it isn't funded. I understand that too. However, in San Diego, we are recognized as an ADRC, and it's very difficult to integrate that, but I was wondering maybe if this is the time to include that and to give them new life.
Thank you, Rosemarie. Our next comment is from Edie. Oh, Edie, you just put your hand down. We'll move along to Vital Medina. Your line is open on our end, but it looks like you're self-muted.
All right, I should be unmuted now, I hope.
Yes, yes you
are.
are.
All right, great. Well, my name is Vidal Medina. I am a system change advocate for Resources for Independent Central Valley here in Fresno, California. We are one of 28 ILCs in California. So we represent persons with disabilities of all ages, of course. And I had a question for the equity work group on the MPA regarding if there was did the group reach out to organizations that had to do with persons with disabilities? I appreciate that the glossary has disabilities, but with disabilities, it's good to get a perspective of history as well, as some of you mentioned. I realize that. But was there any attempt to reach out to organizations? There's actually a large organization. It's called the California Federation for Independent Living Centers. It's in Sacramento, California, and they kind of oversee all the ILCs. I wonder if you can respond to that. I would appreciate it.
Just a process note, we want to take all the public comment, and then if we have time, I'd be happy to provide some information in response to the questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next comment is from Katya Nelson. Katya, your line is open.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Katya Nelson, and I work in the Government Affairs Department at APLA Health in Los Angeles, and I also co-chair the Public Policy Committee of the LA County Commission on HIV, which is our Ryan White federal planning body. And first, I really want to thank you guys for such great work. I'm so happy that an equity work group was put together as part of the Master Plan for Aging work. And one thing, a number of us have submitted some recommendations through Engage, and I wanted to make a public comment today, to ask whether I can see in the equity section recommendations document there are some specific populations called out and noting systemic inequities in accessing good care, and I would ask that there please be the inclusion of older adults living and aging with HIV in the plan, because more and more people are over the age of 50 who are living with HIV, and with the treatment that we have available, people are living long, healthy lives and experiencing aging, and there are, as I mentioned, some other specific needs for that population. So just something to, please consider. I know this is a higher level plan, but it would be really wonderful to have that included. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I do want to just pause here and say that we've got a couple of folks who are joining us by phone. You're also welcome to jump in the queue. The way to do that is to press *9, and that will raise your hand in our webinar platform. And for additional public comment, you can email engage@aging.ca.gov. Betsy Morris, it looks like you're next. Your line is open. Betsy, you're self-muted.
There we go. Thank
you. Oh, you muted yourself.
Don't there. Thank you. Yes. So I'm with the Berkeley East Bay Gray Panthers, and we joined with the Long Beach and San Francisco Gray Panthers, which are the three, among us, were the three largest chapters in the state. We've mostly been focusing on the nursing home and long-term community support systems aspect of the Master Plan on Aging, and I was unable to get on the call earlier. So my first question is just to make sure I can receive the recording. My second, so I'd like to get on that list. My second point is that when I look at the documents that I've received so far, which I appreciate the references to systemic racism. I appreciate the efforts to protect people in different categories or ensure equity in different categories. But what's missing for me is a set of definitions and also a set of directions, because unless we know what we mean by equity, that word is used throughout. And I think we know what we feel it means, which is a distribution of resources and access to resources, but I would encourage you to have those definitions rather than just asking questions. And I feel a need to add direction because paying attention to inequities is not the same as saying where we're trying to go. So with that in mind, I want to speak up for the issue of mitigating poverty and the disproportionate numbers of the various groups that we know are in poverty, the disproportionate numbers, not to characterize whole categories of people as poor, but that we have to address and eliminate the issues of poverty across households and also within our state geographically. The second thing I would really like to focus on is eliminating the disproportionate number of early deaths, particularly among Black and Brown Californians. Obviously, if you die before reaching the category of senior, we're missing the point. And for me, that personally has been very important. The number of early deaths of people in their 50s not just homeless adults, friends of mine actually, but also too many Black neighbors of mine, mentors of mine, died in their 50s and early 60s because of disparities and lack of adequate information about what hospitals and emergency rooms were available and open. So I'm strongly suggesting that you add definitional and directional terms to your statement of tools and the questions that you've set up as a equity subcommittee. And thank you for your good work in representing these important issues.
Thank you, Betsy. Moving right along, Evie Kosower. Evie, your line is open on our end, but you are self-muted.
Okay, stuff. All right, there it is.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, and I may not have heard everything, or so you may have included some of this, but I'm wondering about the terms of perhaps what I would call geographic equity for certain things, particularly the seniors who are able to participate outside of home and for social involvement, for keeping ourselves healthy, because I'm a senior, and for engaging our minds, keeping healthy in that mental health sense of way, which is often neglected. We get health care, but we don't get that kind of stimulation and using our skills and what we have to offer. One of the things that I have noticed here over the years I've been working in this area is the lack of senior centers that are sponsored by the government, some government agency. The 2 or 3 really good ones are private monies and privately run, and they're scattered all over our county. There isn't real equity. Some of the smaller cities have a really great one for the people in their little area, and you can travel to them, I suppose, and participate if you can hop in your car and get there. So transportation for these things is another issue. And I live in a primarily immigrant, low to middle income area, and we haven't had one here up until recently, which may be opening after the pandemic, but it's very uneven. That's my comment.
Thank you very much. And Kim, at this time, I don't see any additional hands raised, so I will pass it back to you.
Okay, just a couple, I think the public comments largely are so powerful and stand for themselves. Just a couple of factual responses. Yes, Betsy, a glossary absolutely is being included, and thank you to the additional encouragement for that. Yes, Vidal, we are working very closely with the California Federation for Independent Living Centers. Christina Mills is on the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and Marielle Kiesler, ILC, is here today on the Equity Work Group, but there is more to do and deepen. But so ILC is our core partners, which leads me to speak to the ADRC. Aging and Disability Resource Centers are a part of the strategy to expand and simplify access across the state. And so absolutely the ADRC Advisory Committee at Department of Aging, which I hope you are a part of as a San Diego ADRC, is looking at both the immense need for clear, no wrong door at this moment as people are scrambling for more information and changes in system, and also the opportunity with CARES Act providing additional money to the ADRC. So how do we use this moment to make a strategic leap forward? So I urge you to plug into the ADRC committee, and happy to follow up with you on that. 2 communities that were lifted up, I just want to echo and express gratitude. Katya, thank you for lifting up people with HIV, and to your point, there are people living longer with chronic conditions, and so it is absolutely a part of the plan. And I think the particular lived experience of living through the beginning of HIV has profoundly impacted a lot of our older leaders of our coronavirus response. I'm thinking particularly of Secretary Imbisciani here in California, who leads the Cal Veterans Homes, who talks directly about his large success, which he always knocks on wood, but to date in preventing infection and cases and death in the veterans' homes, largely came out of his expertise and his experience. Again, that expertise, that life experience in that particular moment. So I think that's a wonderful connection. And then Nancy, thank you for leading us off also in speaking about religion, but I thought you were going to mention one of the programs that was created in 2018, a state program specifically to provide assistance to California's 20,000 Holocaust survivors. Another example of elders who have lived history, survived history. And California, I believe, if I'm remembering right from our friends at Bet Zedek, has the largest community of Holocaust survivors in the US. And they will correct me if I have that wrong. And so again, another community where we have much to learn from and much to repay. So thank you for all of those connections. And I'm sorry, Evie, last but not least, geographic equity. Yes, California is nothing if not a collection of communities with great diversity. And so all of the plan is meant to be applicable and adaptable in urban and rural, suburban, frontier, foothill, all the many different variations, often within one county. And that as much as we can drive our data down to county level and even zip code level, we know will allow for better planning, better outcomes, better solutions. So that is a huge goal of our dashboard. We won't get there all the way in 1.0 in December, given the state of data and the various, whether it's SOGI or disability indicators or race indicators. There's a lot of work to do in data quality and data source, but we share that belief that that's how you operationalize equity, at least a key plank of operationalizing equity. Given the time, if we want to do one more, I see Bill's hands up and Bill's been an active participant. Maybe we could do Bill, and then we could also give people the gift of time back.
Fantastic. Yeah, Bill, your line is open.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for letting me have this moment. Just wanted to kind of address the portion that Yi Yao was talking about discrimination and stereotyping. And how does the master plan, or have you thought out double stereotypes, or for instance, being Black and LGBTQ, or Japanese and LGBTQ, or LGBTQ and disability, or any other combination that involves a double stereotype? And then also regarding the conversation on LGBTQ and the history of LGBTQ rights and all that kind of stuff, and I mentioned this before in a prior one, a meeting where we know the data, we know that LGBTQ people are single, have no children, that kind of stuff, but it's the meaning behind that and the, the systemic discrimination faced by executive orders from Eisenhower when he purged all LGBT people from the federal government, is understanding how that impacted the community. And so I'm going to submit a piece through email to kind of educate, throw that part of that education out there to the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We are incredibly grateful for that. I'm going to see if Rigo or Carmelita want to comment on a discussion of intersectionality that people are thinking and working through.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I think, been at the forefront of the conversation. I think that's, when we look at aging and ageism and also ableism, I think it's also we speak to that in terms of we have been speaking through that and looking at it through the lens of that intersectionality of looking at the various areas of racism, xenophobia, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. So definitely we are looking at having those conversations and also providing guidance in the formation of the recommendations within the master plan, taking that into consideration.
Rigo, are we using those terms in the master plan?
Well,
that terminology in the master, I don't know every part of the master plan, but
right.
Are we?
Yeah. I mean, we've through our work, certainly in our conversations, we provided some of that guidance, and so ultimately we'll need to take a look and see how those terms are, being intentionally and explicitly utilized, to a point earlier, I think that Andy had brought up about these intersections. But certainly the discussions have been there. And I think we really have made that a very intentional in terms of how we view equity in looking at these intersections. Very carefully, very intentionally, and explicitly.
And Cheryl, intersectionality is listed in the glossary, I think.
Right.
We do have it, so.
It is, but when he started breaking down the LGBTQ community, we didn't break it down like that. So if someone wants to give us some information, then we can further define what that is, what that means.
And I believe, Kim, I believe Bill did say that, right? He's going to be providing some information, and someone that's I certainly know well too. So I think he's got some valuable input, Cheryl, that we can draw from, and of course, I think open to receiving any additional information.
Like I said, we're open. Whatever you want to put in this glossary is fine with us.
And again, I think the power of graphics images that you all have identified around equity and equality. There may be some graphic images around intersectionality between aging and ableism, or racism and aging, that may be helpful. I think we saw some of that in the frameworks work, but I think there's other resources out there too. So again, recognizing that visuals matter, graphics matter, words matter. Welcome all forms of media that help communicate.
Is Karen Lincoln still on?
Yes, I'm here.
Would that be something that you can provide to us as well? The graphics for the other areas as you provided for the equity?
Probably not alone. I think it's well, what I think would be important, just while we're on the topic, is that if there are graphics that are needed, if there are concerns that some graphics are not inclusive enough or don't convey the message, or they're not communicating the message and the intent, then we might want to identify those graphics that are up for discussion. And then I think as a committee, not the equity committee specifically, but any committee could sort of help assist in that matter.
Agreed.
Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
Okay, if there are no other comments from the work group, we can go to next steps. Rigo, it sounds, if I have this right, you and Carmelita and Kevin, as he comes back, will be finalizing the recommendations, finalizing the glossary, scoping perhaps this history, how we connect where we were to where we are and where we're going. Are those the three pieces that are kind of being worked on, aiming for the end of the month so that it can be shared out with SAC and then discussed at the broader SAC the 15th? Is that a fair summary?
That's correct.
And we will follow up as always by email, and by that, of course, I mean Amanda Lawrence, our fabulous project director, in partnership with Rigo and Kevin and Carmelita to share that out, both with the work group and with our Together We Engage email list, which is the way to stay informed and get recordings and get the transcripts. With that, I really am a big believer that we are all doing health and wellness. I never want to cut a discussion short, but I also never want to keep people in a meeting. If you could stretch your legs or take a moment to meditate, or otherwise have 15 minutes in your day. So anything else before from the work group before we wrap?
Just again, I do want to stress that, we do have the 31st as a deadline for, in terms of, revising our recommendations, our glossary, et cetera. But I do want to encourage everyone not to wait till the 31st. So as this is top of mind now, take time and do it. The sooner the better, so that we can have ample time to really incorporate your thoughts into our work. And also, if there's a need to have some follow-up with you, I think it would be helpful to get that input from you sooner rather than later. Thank you.
So do you want to be specific?
I would say no more than a week from now. I think by, I would say like the 26th, so that gives a few days, at least 5 days before
What
the end of the
I was
month.
thinking is that we had asked Rita if she would send, I'm just saying we gave people some information.
Right.
And so if we get them to follow up on it, I think we need to be specific. That's all.
Good.
Yeah, I just want to be courteous to folks. I think you give me, I think just a week, so it gives some time on both ends, getting it in, as well as then having an opportunity to have a dialogue if necessary and a chance to incorporate it into the documents. That would be ideal.
Sounds good. Sounds like it's a wrap.
It is. Thank you all for all that you have done this morning and have done to get us to this point, and we'll do the next coming weeks. Be well, be in touch, talk soon. Thank you.